Hello, everybody. Hope you're having a great day. Thank you for joining me for this IELTS listening preparation video today. We're going to be looking at the matching question type in this video, and I hope you're ready because this is quite an interesting listening question. Now, you're probably already familiar with what a matching question type is, perhaps from university or the traditional school setting, or maybe even from the reading section of the exam. There's also a matching question type in the reading, although this is a tiny bit different, although the strategy is somewhat similar. Basically, today we're going to be looking at matching various features to a list of options. And instead of reading the information, we're going to have to listen for the information. So this comes with its own set of difficulties and strategy, which we'll look at today. So come on with me, let's get started. First, I'm going to give you a brief overview about this question type. And like I said, you'll have to match a list of options to a list of features. And you'll hear all of this information in a listening prompt that will be played once. Now, usually you're going to see more questions than options. In our example today, we will look at something like this. So for example, you'll have maybe 4 questions and 3 options, or 6 questions and 4 options, something like this. This is actually quite difficult because it means you will use your options more than once. However, there are some cases where you might have more options than questions, and the instructions may indicate whether or not each option can be used once. Now, if your instructions indicate that the options can only be used once, consider yourself lucky, because then you can cross out the options as you use them. Today, we won't be given this luxury. It won't be that easy, and we will have to reuse our options. So we will have to listen for keywords in order to understand the information and get our answers correct. In order to do this, we're going to use the scanning technique. So think about this as listening for your keywords. You're never going to listen blindly. You're always going to be listening for something. This is very similar to the reading technique because you would never read without looking for keywords. We're basically bringing that into the listening section by listening for keywords. We will go over this in our strategy. And for the matching question type, similar to the reading, you'll really have to understand your synonyms. What I mean by this is the words in the questions are probably not going to be used in the listening prompt. They may if you have perhaps an easier question type or an easy section, but be on the lookout for synonyms. So for example, if something in your question says hard, you may hear difficult in the prompt or vice versa. This is definitely something that you should be doing when you study and before you take the test. Your knowledge of vocabulary will really help you in this section. All right, so here's our guide. This is what we will be following in our step-by-step example in just a bit. First, we're going to read the questions. These could be the questions or statements that we'll have to match to our options. And as we do this, we should be underlining our key words. Now, reading the questions and underlining keywords should be done together. You'll have about 20 seconds to read the information and underline and do all of your preparation work before the listening prompt is played. So I would suggest that you pair 1 and 2 up. With time and practice, it will be easier to read and underline at the same time. Today, we'll probably do step 1 on its own and step 2 on its own, just so that we're clear with what we're doing. But in the test, you should combine these 2 steps. Then you're going to think of synonyms. So like I said on the previous slide, you might see hard in the question and you might hear difficult. You should know that these things are synonyms, and this will help you flow through the exam better and understand exactly what is being said. And then you're going to take notes according to your section. This is very interesting. Remember, there are 4 sections in the listening exam. Now, according to test takers and also examiners and just all the information we have on the IELTS exam, the difficulty increases from section 1 to section 4. As such, the note-taking system for each section varies. Now, sections 1 and 3 would have a similar note-taking section, and section 2 and 4 would have a similar note-taking section. We go over all of this in our introduction video, but for now, I'll just tell you that this question type today will be in section 3. Now, if this question type were in section 4 in the exam, you would follow the note-taking system for section 4. Today, we're going to be following section 3. So that means we're going to be listening to a conversation with up to 4 people. Now, this doesn't mean you're always going to hear 4 people. It just means that the maximum amount of people speaking could be 4. You could also have 2 or 3. They'll be speaking about an educational topic, so this could be something like university talk or talking to a career counselor, anything that is educational in nature. And so in order to really understand what each person is saying and to keep details clear, it's best to use a chart system. I'll show you this in our notes in our step-by-step example, but don't worry, you don't have to keep intricate notes with a ton of words. We actually suggest keeping minimal notes with symbols, abbreviations, things that will be clear for you. Remember, this chart is not going to be graded, it's not going to be looked at by the examiner, so really use something that makes sense to you, although feel free to follow my guide in just a minute. All right, so here's our preparation work. This is our introduction. Let's go ahead and start our step-by-step example. Okay, so here is our example for today. As we know, we'll be in section 3, so we have questions 21 to 25, the 5 of these right here, and then we have our letters A, B, and C. We'll have to match these to the features that we see here below. Don't pay attention to the right side just yet. I will be using this as our chart when we are listening. Right now I just have 2 columns, but I can easily add more columns, and it'll be even easier for you with pen and paper. So I would suggest just quickly drafting a chart as you listen. This will help keep things organized for section 3. All right, so let's get to it. First, we're going to read the questions. In this case, I mean this question here, the options and the features. We'll read it once and then we'll go ahead and underline it together. So, what does Jack tell his tutor about each of the following course options? A, he'll definitely do it. B, he may or may not do it. Or C, he won't do it. So we'll look at this a little bit later in just 1 minute, but you see there are different types of probability. Okay, now for our features. We have media studies, women in power, culture and society, identity and popular culture, introduction to cultural theory. Most likely we're just going to have 2 people here, so this will be fine in terms of my columns. I'm going to wait to write the name Jack and tutor because I usually start with whoever speaks first, but this is a good clue. And then, of course, as I mentioned earlier, you're going to be able to choose any letter more than once, so we won't be able to eliminate any of these letters as we go along. This is a great example because it's more difficult. All right, let's go ahead again and now underline our key words. This question isn't really necessary to underline. We just really need to listen for what Jack says about course options. These are clearly courses, so I wouldn't underline anything here. I don't want to waste time with that. What I do want to emphasize here is the probability. So there are words like definitely, and then we have may or may not, and won't. Then for our keywords here, I would underline things like media, okay, because studies could also be used for women or culture and society. So media is the main thing here. Number 22, I would listen out for women in power. This is very specific. Same thing with culture and society here. And then I would say identity and culture again. You may even want to underline popular since that is specific. And then I'm going to say an introduction to cultural theory. Now, notice how the keywords we underlined are pretty much the words. And in this case, It'll be easy to listen out for this information, and you can expect that it will come in order. So you can sort of answer as you go along if you'd like to do that, or you can keep your notes in your chart if you'd like to do that. Whatever is easier for you, and I would encourage you to practice so that you understand what you prefer. So these are our steps 1 and 2, reading the questions and underlining keywords. I even did this in a slow way just to make sure that everything was clear in the video, but it was still quite quick. So with the time you have left over for this specific question, you should be thinking of synonyms. And if you'd like, you can write them out next to the options here, or you can just keep them in mind. This will help you because, again, in the listening prompt, these words might not be explicitly stated. So let's go ahead and just write some synonyms. Now, different ways to say definitely. We could say things like certainly, or he will sign up instead of do it, or perhaps he will register for the course. So this is just to say, for example, in the transcript, Jack may say, "Oh, I'll certainly sign up," or "I will register." And that would still be considered A, as he would definitely do it. Think of some words for probability. Instead of may or may not, he may say instead maybe, or he may say, "Oh, I'm not sure." And again, you could also think of signing up and registering for B as well. And then for ways to say he won't do it, think of things like definitely not. So this is explicit, where he definitely will not do it. He might say something like, "Oh, that seems very interesting, but I can't do it for one reason or another." This example here is very important to pay attention to because in the exam, there are many instances where the transcript will say something and then immediately after add in a negative remark that shows it is not the correct answer. So an example here could be, "Oh, media studies seems very interesting. I'd like to do it, but I won't have time in my schedule." So basically, many people would start with, "Oh, he wants to do it," and they would mark A without listening to the but and everything else that comes after that. This is why it is so important to keep nice notes, succinct without losing your train of thought and without losing the path of the speaker. We'll listen to this in just a minute. Before we do that, I'd like to go over some brief synonyms for numbers 21 to 25 as well. Now, for media studies, another way you could say that is perhaps understanding or studying media, okay? For women in power, think of some synonyms for women. So another way to say women could be female, and another way for women and power, you could also say women's studies, like I said earlier. That's why studies in number 21 isn't necessarily underlined. Let's go ahead to number 23 and think of some synonyms. For culture, a synonym here could be perhaps the public. This could also work here for society. And people would also work for society. And number 24, quickly, I would say something like individuality for identity. So I'll write here individuality. And then, of course, pop culture is a nice abbreviation for popular culture, so don't be surprised if that comes up in the transcript as well. Abbreviations are a good test to see if your vocabulary is on the right track. All right, let's go ahead here. And the last one, in introduction, you could also say it's something like a basic explanation and maybe principles of culture. So I'll put here also principles. This is usually something that denotes an introduction or something basic. Now, here are just some possible synonyms. Since these are course names, it will most likely be in the text as a course name. The synonyms in this particular example are more helpful for our options here, but it's still a nice example to do. It's still a nice exercise to do in terms of synonyms. Synonyms will always help you in any case in the exam. So if you have some extra time before the listening prompt is played, go ahead and just help yourself and think of some various synonyms, even in cases where they're titles. You never want to just sit and not do anything for this extra time you have before the listening. So go ahead and do that. Okay, so imagine that in the actual test, we have done all of this in our 20 seconds. Again, there wasn't that much to underline, so don't be nervous if you think this is a lot of work to do in 20 seconds. It really isn't, and with time and practice, you'll be able to combine the underlining and the reading and possibly even the synonyms. And here I wrote everything out. You can definitely use abbreviations or anything that makes more sense to you. Okay, now here we have our chart. I'm going to type along my notes as we listen to the prompt. Feel free to follow along with me or take your own notes. Afterwards, we'll go through exactly what I wrote, why I wrote it, and I'm always keeping the key words in mind as I write my notes. And remember, whoever speaks first will go in this first column here. Okay, let's start listening.
You will hear a communication studies student talking to his tutor about optional courses for the next semester.
Come in. Oh, hello, Jack. Have a seat. Right. You said you wanted to see me to talk about your options next semester?
That's right. We have to decide by the end of next week. Really, I'd like to do all 5 options, but we have to choose 2, don't we?
Yes, but the choice depends on your major to some extent. You're majoring in communication studies, aren't you?
That's right.
So, for example, the media studies option will cover quite a lot of the same area you did in the core module on mass communications this semester, the development of the media through the last 2 centuries in relation to political and social issues.
Well, that was interesting, but I've decided I'd rather do something completely new. There's a women's studies option, isn't there?
Yes, Women and Power. Again, it has a historical focus. It aims to contextualize women's studies by looking at the legal and social situation in the 19th and early 20th centuries.
So it would be useful if I intended to specialize in women's studies, but I'm not sure I do actually.
Well, it might still be useful to give you an idea of the issues involved. It's taught by Dr. Steed.
Oh, really? I'll sign up for that then. What about the option on culture and society?
That addresses the historical debate on the place of culture since the Industrial Revolution in Britain.
So a historical focus again.
Do I get the message you're not so keen on history?
Well, it's just that we seem to have done quite a lot this semester. Anyway, I'll think about that one.
If you're interested in a course focusing on current issues, there's the option on identity and popular culture. That approaches the subject through things like contemporary film, adverts, soap operas, and so on.
That sounds interesting. Can you tell me who runs it?
Well, it's normally Dr. Stevens, but he's on sabbatical next semester, so I'm not sure who will be running it. It should be decided by next week, though.
Right. Well, I might wait until then to decide. And the last option is Introduction to Cultural Theory, isn't it? I'm quite interested in that too. I was talking to one of the second-year students, and she said it was really useful. It made a lot of things fall into place.
Yes, but in fact, in your major, you'll have covered a lot of that already in Communications 102, so that might be less useful than some of the others.
Oh, I'll forget about that one then.
Now, while you're here, we could also discuss how you're getting on with your core module assignment.
All right, and we're back. Now I've made my table a bit larger just so you can look through this with me. I hope you were able to follow along because this is a great example of how important keywords and synonyms are for the matching question. All right, let's start from the beginning here. Now in my chart, I had tutor and USA. I wrote USA because she had a North American accent. I could have also written Canada, but for me, USA is easier to remember for an American accent. This helped me just keep things in line. In this particular example, it wasn't so important since we only had 2 people, but in conversations with up to 4 people, writing the accent or certain characteristics of the voice can really help keep things organized. Jack had a British accent, so I went ahead and wrote UK. You can also put things like deep voice or happy in order to remember, okay, this person is the tutor, or this person is Jack, etc., etc. Now, we're going to look at the transcript in just a bit, but the beginning was extremely important because Jack talked about having to sign up for 2 things. So he only has to choose 2 of these 5 examples here. We know that A will not be used more than twice. So I went ahead and wrote that. Now, the tutor was talking first about media studies, of course. I didn't have to write out this whole word, but I'm a rather fast typer, so I went ahead and wrote it out. If you wanted to, you could even quickly just write M studies or MS for media studies, or you could just follow along here. But she said that it was more or less the same areas, and he said he was interested, I have INT, in something completely new, so I have an X for he won't do it. You could also write C if that's easier for you, but I used X. Note how I use these dots here for things that aren't necessarily important. I use these dots to connect ideas. So I have media studies here, women and power. Notice how the transcript said women's studies, which was great because we used our synonym here. So current issues is another synonym, for example, for identity and popular culture. Notice how sign up was used quite a bit. Also think about it. These are great synonyms here for may or may not, and sign up we had predicted, so that's great. So just think about it. If you hadn't thought of these synonyms beforehand, it would have been more difficult listening to this transcript. So do not skip this step as it's so important. Now I'm going to paste the transcript right below my chart so that we can go through the answers together and look at these specific statements. All right, so I've put our transcript on 2 pages here. It might look a little bit different now on this screen. So we see our 5 questions here. The first part of the transcript is on the left-hand side, and the second half is right here. I've sort of condensed my chart just so that we can reference it if need be, but this is the transcript part 1 and part 2 that we'll use to understand everything. Media studies and understanding media. I have the specific statement right here when Jack says, well, that was interesting. And so I had written INT, but this is an example of what we talked about here, but I've decided I'd rather do something completely new. Now, notice how he doesn't explicitly say, I won't do it, but he uses the connector but in order to say that he wants to do something completely new because he had done something similar in the past. So this shows that he will not do it, and so it would be C. He will not do it. So I'll go ahead and just write C for us, and this is a clear example of what we talked about earlier. Knowing that this trick exists is extremely important, so go ahead and remember that for this question type with a won't or a low probability or an impossibility. The exam will put something positive to make you think that the answer is something else, and then change the answer using this famous word, but. All right, perfect. Let's go to number 22. Now, women and power. In the listening, we saw women's studies here. So she says that it's women and power. But Jack says, so it would be useful if I intended to specialize in women's studies, but I'm not sure I do. And here we go again with this idea. This seems like it might be C. He won't do it. But then Dr. Ray continues and says it might still be useful. And so he changes his mind. He says, oh, really? I'll sign up for that then. And so sign up, our synonym here for definitely do it, shows that he will do it. So 22 would be A. despite the listening suggesting otherwise. This is why it's important not to immediately answer just based on what you first hear, but really take your notes. So see how I said not sure, then ... I connected it, you will sign up. If a student is not taking notes, but is just writing quickly based on what they hear in the first place, they're really falling for these tricks in the IELTS exam and they're getting these incorrect. So take your time, still follow along, but write your notes. Let's go to number 23, culture and society. Dr. Ray says culture here. Jack says culture and society. Dr. Ray says culture in her following statement. And Jack says, historical focus. He's not too keen on that. So Jack says, we seem to have done quite a lot this semester. Anyway, I'll think about that one. And think about it is a great synonym for may or may not. So in this case, number 23 is B. He doesn't explicitly say, no, I won't, yes, I will. So this is B. Let's go back here to our identity and popular culture. So Dr. Ray talks about that here. Jack asks who runs it, and she says Dr. Stevens. And Jack says, well, I might wait until then to decide. So again, this does not confirm, and it also doesn't reject the idea. So 24 would be B, because it shows that he might do it and he might not. Might is another great synonym for may or may not. So that is an excellent clue as well. All right, the last one, number 25, Introduction to Cultural Theory. Here we go here, Introduction to Cultural Theory. She says, yes, it's your major. It might be less useful. And he just says, oh, I'll forget about that one. And so forget about that one. Forget would be something like forget about it, don't worry about it, definitely not. And so that would be C, because he is not interested in it. He is not going to sign up for it. So we have C, A, B, B, and C. Notice how A is only used once. And if we go back to this statement here, he says, we have to choose two, don't we? And this, usually we would think it would help us out because it says that we have to choose two. So you may have thought in the beginning, well, A will show up twice. And that isn't necessarily true. What this means is that A can definitely not be used more than twice, since only two of these can be chosen. But it could be the case that Jack will think about two of them. So he will think about culture and society. He will think about identity and popular culture, but then just decide on one. And he might do this after the conversation with Dr. Ray, and we will never know what that conversation is. So don't let something like this confuse you. This doesn't mean that two have to be decided in this conversation. The fact that he has selected two to think about means that later on in his academic journey, he will decide between culture and society and identity and popular culture. Wow, so there we have it, our lovely screen here with notes and synonyms and the table. I really hope you were able to understand just how important the keywords and the synonyms are for this matching question type. You saw here that definitely was not even used once. You'll need to think of synonyms as well. All right, great job. Let's go ahead and look at some do's and don'ts and wrap up this lesson. Okay, here are some very helpful reminders for the wrap up. I'll go over some do's and don'ts. First off, do utilize your time. So you saw today we had minimal things to underline, minimal keywords, but we still wanted to utilize that time for thinking of synonyms. You'll also want to study up on your synonyms beforehand. You saw how important that was today. So utilize your time and remember the order. Things will most likely come in order. So make sure you can sync up the answer options to your section notes. And again, the synonyms are important. Now for some don'ts. Make sure you don't waste your time. Don't be fooled in thinking, oh, there isn't that much to underline, so let me just relax for 20 seconds. That is never a good option. So don't waste your time and really make sure you're in the zone for the listening prompt. Also, don't focus on only one aspect. So don't just think about one answer, or don't just think about one speaker. You want to listen, you want to take notes, you want to make sure your chart is organized or your notes are organized, and make sure that you're multitasking. Of course, don't fall for these common tricks like we saw today with the word but, or with introducing a negative point before a positive point. This will make you answer blindly. What I mean by answer blindly is writing the first answer that comes in the listening prompt without listening for the explanation. If we had done that, we may have gotten one or two wrong in our example. So make sure that you are not following for these tricks. And lastly, don't leave anything blank. This would be a really awful option here, because if you leave something blank, you're definitely not getting any points for it. If it's super difficult for you and if you really don't know the correct answer, just guess, because a guess is better than nothing. All right, thank you so much for joining me on this matching adventure today. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you picked up some really great tips and tricks and strategy for this question in the exam. I would encourage you to continue practicing and prepare yourself for test day. A great way to do this is by visiting us at www.bestmytest.com/IELTS. We have a lot of great practice tips and strategy on there, so go ahead and check us out. Thanks so much. Have a lovely day, and I will see you for the next lesson. Bye.